Hey, Brent. Welcome to the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I am so glad to have you here.
Donna, I am pumped to be on the show and just want to say congratulations on the success of your show and how great of a show it is for all the saxophone players. And I'm just really privileged to be on today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And and now I'm going to embarrass you because okay. I love your podcast. I love all your stuff, everything that you've done. And I'm going to dive into a little bit of your history so people get a chance to know you. If they don't know what the resources that you have, by the end of today, they will, because I think it's super important. But I love your podcast. I learned so much from it. You have products and stuff that I've bought that I think are so valuable. Like I bought your band in a box, your backing tracks, your band in a box package, and that's just awesome. We're going to be talking about all this type of stuff, but thank you so much for everything that you've done for many years, not just for a few, but for many years for the jazz and music community.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's part passion. It's a lot of fun. It's part, I love teaching other people how to play jazz music. And I think as you know, music, there's so much joy and fulfillment and all these things that can come out of, being a better musician. And so whenever I hear from people about how much it's helped, that makes my day. And, it's been years, years and years. And so I just keep going. Why not? Yeah,
definitely. And, you mentioned the words joy and fulfillment. And first of all, I think you're a great teacher. I really do. I think I love your teaching style. Oh, absolutely. And with joy and fulfillment, especially now. So, people, we're recording this during the times of COVID. It's actually wintertime at this point. And joy and fulfillment are so important right now because a lot of people are going a little stir crazy. If you're a musician, you're debating your career choice. It's making it rather difficult. But also what I've noticed this trend, and let me know if you agree with me or not. A lot of people during the COVID pandemic have taken up an instrument, have decided, you know what? My gosh, there's not, you never know if you get this virus, what the outcome would be or whatever, but let me learn music. Let me learn jazz now. So this is why I don't have any regrets. And I don't know if you've noticed an uptick in terms of the number of people wanting to learn jazz.
Yeah, I have definitely. I think that it's partly an online learning thing in general is so big, but it is an opportunity for people to get engaged in a hobby. Or I hear from a lot of folks that are like, 25 years ago, I used to play the saxophone, and now I finally decided like, hey, you know what? That was so much fun. I've been putting it off for years. Let's do it now. Same reason my wife and I bought a puppy. We're like, hey, how could we train a little puppy? Well, if we're all my wife's going to the work and I'm working, and now we have a little bit, everybody's working from home now. So we have some time to do that. So I think it's kind of the same thing. But I think a lot of people also recognize that when you're in stressful times, whether it be personally in your life, whether it be on a more global scale, like we're obviously dealing with here, having something like music that can bring you to somewhere else and keep your mind busy. As you know, it's very difficult to become a great saxophone player. It's very difficult to become a great improviser. All these things require a lot of time and effort, and it can be a lot of fun at the same time. It's something to get your mind on more positive things that are a little more uplifting. So I have seen a lot of people coming in with those goals.
And what's also interesting too, and yes, this is the Everything Saxophone Podcast, and people may be wondering, why do I have a guitarist on? It's this is super important. Improvisation doesn't have to be just jazz. Although, your site is Learn Jazz Standards. Improvisation can be in any style. And jazz has evolved so much that, a lot of times people think jazz, they think the style of Charlie Parker, or they think the style of Cannonball Adderley, or Hank Mobley, Dexter Gordon, Sonny Stitt, Sonny Rollins. But you look at some of the young and upcoming players today, and even just, the players out there today, what they're doing, the Grace Kellys, even the Derek Browns, then you have like on the contemporary jazz side, you have Michael Linkton. You also have Kamasi Washington. You have all this eclectic mix of jazz. What jazz is today, it's so different than, gosh, even when I was growing up, there weren't so many, how do I want to word this? Subgenres, I guess I could say.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different things you can do with it. And, I'm a guitar player, but actually the musicians in my community are all kinds of instruments, because I don't really, that's something interesting about jazz, is that it's actually a very forgiving style of music to teach, in the sense that, there are certain things to your instrument that are very technically specific that, yes, you do have to get those in order. But then when it comes to jazz, improvisation, all these different things, there are certain laws I guess they're not laws. There are certain tenets, though, and certain things that kind of just cover the entire board of what everybody should work on to become a better improviser. And, I think here's something that I think is really interesting about jazz. And of course, this can apply to other styles of music too. But I often tell people who are maybe not even interested so much in playing jazz, but they kind of come across what I do. I tell them, whatever style of music you want to play, if you learn a little bit of jazz, I sort of can kind of almost guarantee you that that's going to help take whatever else you're doing to the next level. And that's not because jazz is a superior kind of music. It's just that there's more musical information oftentimes in jazz that can influence what you do. I'm thinking just years and years and years back, when I used to teach a lot of private lessons, I had a rock guitar player taking a lesson with me, and I was teaching him how to play all these different inversions and seventh chords all over his fretboard. And, he immediately went after that lesson, almost recomposed all of his songs to add all these different things. And he claims and told me that this just made everything so much better. Just that information that he learned just by studying a tiny bit of jazz, that he wouldn't have had that inspiration, that insight to be able to apply to his rock tunes that he was composing. So it doesn't matter what kind of improviser you want to be, what kind of musician you want to be. It doesn't matter what kind of jazz musician you want to be, because like you so well put, you could be someone who likes to play Dixie music. You could be someone who likes to play bebop or hard bop. You could be someone who likes to play the New York modern jazz stuff. You could be someone who wants to play smooth jazz. I don't care what it is. There are so many things that you can learn just from studying this style of music that can apply all over the board.
Yeah, I mean, look at also, the some of the popular bands, and some of the artists like Andy Snitzer, right? He's played with Simon and Garfunkel. He's played with a bunch of people. Jeff Coffin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's playing with Dave Matthews. Bob Reynolds, who's played with John Mayer, but also is with Snarky Puppy. They are jazz phenoms. And they're also in I'll call it the popular realm, so to speak, with all that type of music. And I do believe that their jazz background has certainly enhanced, their soloing for, their current jobs, the current groups that they're in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's interesting whenever I hear the debate about what is jazz and what's not jazz, I sort of just ignore it altogether, because I think at the end of the day, it's, are you a jazz influenced musician or are you not? And that's, it doesn't matter which one you are, but you can take a little bit of influence from aspects of jazz and apply it perfectly fine into everything that you're doing right now. And for me, that has I've dabbled in singer-songwriter stuff and other things like that. It's directly influenced what I do. And it doesn't mean it sounds quote unquote jazzy by any means. It just means it shifted my perspective a little bit about the kinds of options that were maybe available to me that I didn't know were available before.
Yeah. You know what? Speaking about that, let's get a little bit into your background.
Sure.
How you got involved in music, because I know you're not from New York, based on some, and I know a little bit about your background, but also the way you say
all New
words.
Yorkers can, I've been living in New York for 10 years, but all New Yorkers can sniff me out that I'm not from New York originally.
Yep, so the way you say certain words. and I'm in California now, and it's quite obvious I have a Long Island accent. So, it's like, boom, within like a minute, you're like, yep. Got it. But tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in music and also in jazz.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was, just like, any kid, and, I wanted to be a rock star. And so I got a guitar, and, my parents said, if you save up for half of it, we'll do the other half. And I bought my first guitar, and I was just addicted to it, absolutely addicted to it. And, then high school, I was really into prog rock, and I was in a prog rock band, and we were, I just loved virtuosic music. Somehow I just sort of gravitated to that. And I got into jazz from a friend of mine who I was in a rock band with. He was taking lessons from a teacher who, little did I know, was kind of the small pocket in the town I grew up in, Boise, Idaho. He was like the jazz guy, and around him he had, for lack of better terms, this jazz discipleship going on. And he had this small arts academy, and my friend said, "Hey, why don't you go check out Justin?" Justin was the teacher, and I kind of got involved in the group. And I mean, the kids that were surrounding this teacher were incredible. I mean, they were learning Duke Ellington, solos by ear. They were learning Charlie Parker solos by ear. Wow. They were playing all these tunes. They were playing at this local coffee shop together. And I was just like blown away by this, because I was like, look at all this, and they're showing me all this music they were listening to. And I'd listened to jazz and was intrigued by it before. But that kind of got me like really sucked into it. And it's kind of how it seems to work with jazz, right? You're a musician who likes music, and you're like, yeah, jazz is interesting because I'm a musician. And then eventually you just sort of get like sucked into it. And then you just, it's just how it happens if you get into jazz. So I got really into jazz. I just, practiced 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, you name it. And, just totally did all that. Yeah, I went to college and decided I want to be a jazz musician. So like, or the rest of my social circle was going, you go to college, that's what was socially acceptable. So I couldn't quite pave my way right away. So I pay my way. Did I say pave or pay? Pay my way. So I took a year off, and I just practiced 8 hours a day, and I played a weekly gig, and I checked in with my teacher once a week. I was learning 32 bars of a solo every single week. Just crazy stuff I would never recommend any of my students now do. It was just this, moment in my life that was the height of obsession. Went to college for a year in Seattle, moved to New York because that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in New York because that's where all the jazz music was going on, the really big stuff, all of my jazz heroes. And the rest is history. I just gigged, 4, 5 times a week, local bars, local clubs, all that kind of stuff, teaching students. And eventually my little side hustle, Learn Jazz Standards, my jazz education website, turned into my full-time living. And that's the story.
Well, now, are you still, well, of course not right now, but are you still gigging?
I still gig occasionally. It came to this point where I just really slowly started going, can't do that gig. Sorry, I can't do that gig. I sort of reached this point of burnout where I couldn't continue working all day and all night. And, I got married, and now I have a dog, so it's even more complicated. I just want to snuggle with my dog on the couch at night. And I don't know if I want to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning, but I still do an occasional gig, but I really have ramped down my performing quite a bit.
Yeah, and it does take a tremendous amount of energy. And, actually, I'm curious about this too. Most of my gigs were on Long Island and like surrounding, but in terms of when you were gigging, 4 or 5 nights a week, I mean, were you able to really make a good enough living off of that? Because, I know how when I moved out here, the rate of pay was a lot less than Long Island. I was shocked.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I was able to make a living, but you have to consider the kind of, it just depends on what you consider a living or not. I was living fairly paycheck to paycheck, I had roommates at the time, you know what I mean? It was that kind of a lifestyle. It was the musician's lifestyle I was living. And I have a lot of friends that still are kind of doing the same thing, and some are more successful than others. But it's tough to be a performing musician, and you definitely have to do a lot of teaching and stuff like that, or you have more entrepreneurial ways of making a living, like it's kind of what I do now.
Yeah, and let's actually, I want to, before we dive into how Learn Jazz Standards started, you had mentioned something before, because you're a player and you're also a teacher, and you mentioned that there's certain tenets that make someone a good improviser. How did you discover that? What are those tenets?
Well, I could go into that for a long time. There's a lot of different. Now, you're just talking about improvising in general, or jazz improvisation?
You know what? No, I want to say improvising in general, because I know a lot of the people that listen to this podcast play a very varied styles, varied genres.
Yeah. I would say there's several different things to keep in mind. So one, as far as being able to improvise really well, it has, in my opinion, very little to do with reading a piece of sheet music. Even if you're trying to learn solos that were improvised off of sheet music, at the end of the day, it doesn't have very much to do with it. So really what you want to be focusing fully on is learning things by ear. And there's some people that hear that and they're like, oh, great, that's how I do it now. There's other people that hear that and they're horrified and they're like, is this going to be a waste of my time? And the answer is no, it's not going to be a waste of your time if you're willing to do it over a long period of time and do it consistently. And the good news is it gets easier and easier and easier the more you do. So if you want to be a good improviser, you do have to consider your ears your best asset. So some sorts of things that you want to be thinking about doing are, learning. First simple thing you do is, instead of, learning to read a melody off of a piece of sheet music for a tune you're learning, learn it by ear. It doesn't have to be jazz either. It could be the Beatles, it could be whatever, but learn it by ear. Like, the melody is, like, to me, whenever people say, I'm not really good at learning things by ear, where do I start? I learn the melody. Just learn the melody by ear. Because like learning chord changes by ear, well, that might take a little bit more practice, right? You need to really get into that a little bit more. So learning melodies by ear. If there's any kind of solo that you like, learn just one, like 12 bars, one chorus. If there's a little lick that you like, learn that and then internalize it. Take it through all 12 keys is the classic thing all the musicians like to say to do. And there's a reason for that too, because it does help when you take things into different contexts. And all that is building up your ears. And that's what I would say is one of the most important things. Just really building your ears over and over and over again, all the time, different contexts, different ways. Yes, you can do fundamentals of ear training, which is always great. I mean, learning intervals, being able to recognize or even sing the arpeggios of chord tones, basic chord progressions, all that stuff is really good. You can do that on the side. But more of that applied ear training stuff, I would spend a lot of time doing that. Even if it's hard at first, you just got to kind of get over that first little hill, and there'll be another hill, but you'll have a break for a second and you'll be like, it's a little easier now. And you just keep going up and up and up. The second thing that I would say is, don't try to improvise solely. That's not the best way to say that. Be a composer as well as an improviser. So there's that classic cliche statement of, composing is, or improvisation is simply composing sped up. And that's actually, in my opinion, very true. And a lot of people listen to improvisers and they go, oh, so they can just start playing all this stuff. And the answer is, well, no. I mean, this is stuff that they've refined and honed and all this sort of things. And so if you really want to learn how to play the way you want to play, then you got to start by composing some stuff too. So I always encourage, folks that are like, how do I improvise over a 2-5-1 chord progression? I learned this lick. I learned all the chord tones. I learned all the guide tones. What do I do now? I said, great. You have a lot of tools in your tool chest. Now what I want you to do is compose as many ideas as you can possibly do over that 2-5-1 chord progression. It's just 4 bars. It's not going to hurt you. So just figure out as many ways you can do it. And some of them you might like, some of them you might not like. If you like one, especially, then you should definitely start, taking that to all 12 keys, really getting that into your psyche, because over and above learning the jazz solos of the greats, peoples that you really like to listen to, that's really good stuff. That's how you learn the language. But the stuff that actually comes out of you, that's the stuff that you're more likely to remember. So compose that. Doesn't mean you have to write it down or notate it, but memorize it, right? Memorize what you're doing. Come up with your different ideas. Try composing a 12-bar solo over a blues. The best blues chorus that you can do right now at this moment. Maybe in a year or two, you'll listen back to that solo and you'll be like, that wasn't that good, but today it's good. Today it's good for you. And the great thing is, 2 years from now, you'll compose another 12-bar blues solo, and you'll be like, wow, that's really great. And guess what? All that stuff is stuff that can more easily come out in your improvisation because you've thought through it. And all great improvisers will tell you, it's very rare that you're entering this zone where you're able to just completely spontaneously improvise. Now, you're not necessarily copying and pasting ideas. That's not what you're doing, but you are playing things that are familiar to you. So that's the second thing I would say. The third thing that I would say has almost nothing to do with playing music and practicing in and of itself. It has everything to do with your mindset, because one of the most vulnerable things that you can do musically is improvise. And the reason that is you have no idea what you're about to do, or even if you do have an idea of what you're about to do, you're probably not going to execute it very well because you're already planning on doing it. So that's the first problem. So you have to, in a way, just let go of everything you've been working on in the practice room and just let things actually happen. That's how true improvisation can actually happen. You have to let go of your ego quite a bit. You have to forget about what someone else is doing. If you're playing in a live situation, for example, or you're listening back to yourself on a recording and judging, you have to forget about all of that, because all you can do is the best you can do right now. And you have to kind of take on the growth mindset, the mindset of, every single moment is a learning experience. Because if you don't do that, you're going to feel horrible about yourself when you improvise. And the other thing that makes improvisation, I think, and this is all music, but especially improvisation, I think it's just magnified, is really the reason it's also vulnerable is because it's actually saying more about things that have nothing to do with music. It's the way you actually feel about yourself, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And that's a scary thing. It's scary to be vulnerable in front of other people and play music. And why do I say that? Well, I'll give a quick story. I'm sorry, I'm just talking like crazy here, Donna. But
oh no, this is awesome. This is fantastic.
I'll give a quick story. So my freshman year of college, I remember I sat down to jam for the very first week or something like that with one of the seniors just about to graduate. And he was a really good musician. And after we got done playing a song, he said, Brent, like your shoulders, they were like scrunched up like this. Your hands were like this. You're developing a bad relationship with your instrument. You're all tense. And it took me a few years to realize it wasn't a bad habit of me. It was a bad habit, but it wasn't just because I had a bad habit I developed. It was because I was coming from a place of, I was scared. I was scared about what I was going to play. I was scared what that other person was going to think if I wasn't as good as I wanted to be in my head. But you can't improvise like that. You've got to relax that body. You've got to relax your mind. You've got to try to be at peace with whatever's going to happen and realize that it's the best that you can do right now. So in summary, that's a lot of stuff here. But in summary, yeah, you got to work on that mindset. You got to be a composer as well as an improviser. And remind me what the first thing I said was.
I'm trying to remember myself. Oh my God. This was fantastic. And off the top of my head, I don't remember because I'm thinking about what you just said that just kind of blew my mind with the scrunch.
Learning things by ear. Sorry. Yes. I just wanted to say that. Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah, good reminder for me. But when you, and again, people that are listening to the podcast, please check out, the YouTube video of this too. So you'll get a better visual on this. But, Brent was showing his posture as being really scrunched up and like, oh my gosh, it looks so filled with tension. And you know what? Horn players, man, we go through this, big time also. And it made me think too, myself, you mentioned the word scared. And I think a lot of people can relate to that too, because one of the biggest fears that people have are speaking in public, right? And improvisation is speaking in public through your instrument.
Yes.
When you think about it, and that's where that fear kind of comes from. But people, I guess maybe don't even realize it. And this is a great takeaway. Think about your posture when you're playing, and are you in that really tense state? Because that also will impede your playing, especially as a horn player. It's going to impede your breath support. There's no question about it. It's going to impede your finger dexterity, your coordination between your articulation and your fingers. Just some things to really think about. And one tip I do want to add on top of that too, one way to help you get past that is to practice performing. That's one thing I learned from my teacher, Vince Penzarella, on trumpet many years ago. You've got to practice performing. You've got to practice the performing mindset, because you can't expect to go on a stage and all of a sudden you're able to perform. You've got to be there, and be able to do that. And especially now during the times of COVID, where we can't necessarily be on a stage, although people are creating their own stages in different ways, but this is the time to practice that performance mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also on top of that, realize that the best practice is actually going up and performing. So a lot of times, especially if we're a little bit scared to improvise, we keep telling ourselves, well, once I do this, or once I feel like I'm at this particular level, then I'll go out and go to the jam session or do whatever. But at the end of the day, you kind of just have to do it. And I don't know, I'm sure you've done some recording, Donna. I feel like recording is even more intense. You practice and you practice and you practice and you got all your stuff and you're like, I've got this. I've practiced this so much. It's going to come out perfectly. And then as soon as you get to the recording studio and they tell you that they press the record button, it's just like your brain gets flooded and you're almost paralyzed. It's incredible. Yes. So in order to get better at recording, you also just have to do it a lot.
Oh my God, that's so true. You reminded me, when I first came out here, I was playing with a band, really great band, and it was pop rock music, and I loved it. Adam Exler, what a great songwriter. So I was in the studio, and a really great recording engineer, Matt, and I can't remember his last name, but anyway, I was recording a solo for one of the tunes, and so I'm like, okay, as soon as I get to the recording studio, I felt pumped up, right? I'm playing. And then he's like, okay, let's take another take. Ready, go. I'm like, what? And then, oh no, take another take, go. You didn't even get a chance to think. Sometimes you get wrapped up in that kind of situation where some engineers just make you take 20 takes. Even if your first take is your best take, they still make you do that. And that's a mind game in and of itself, because then you start thinking, did that suck? Yeah. Is he making me do that 20 times because it sucked? And it took a while to realize that, no, he's just doing that because, a lot of times they will piece together things. Think of the Urgent solo, right? Junior Walker and stuff like that. Everything's pieced together. But, there's so many emotions that are tied to whether you're in a recording studio, whether you're at a jam session, whether you're on stage, or whether in your own home playing for your family. Mindset is really huge.
It's massive. And it's not a science, it's not any of this, but I always like to think that it's about 50% of the process of, especially improvisation, but music in general. It's 50% the way you perceive what you're doing and what you believe about what you're about to do. You can practice, and you need to practice, because that's going to prepare you the best you can possibly be. But at the end of the day, it's really exercising this up here, your brain, and I think more so the acceptance of being vulnerable, the acceptance of playing from where you're at, that is really important to being a great performer, being a great musician, being a great improviser, you name it. So it's something that I think we should all be thinking about just as much as we do what scale to play over which and all that different kind of thing.
Absolutely. And, with your tenets, so to speak, and all that tremendous and valuable information, how did you come across that? Like, were you taught that, or did that come across from your years of gigging and also, starting to teach other people?
Oh, really a lot of experience and teaching other people, where I just noticed time and time again, the things that were working for me, the things that weren't working for me, the things that were working for others, the things that weren't working for others. And just slowly but surely realizing those things. It becomes very obvious after a while, especially I have a lot of classical musicians that sometimes come in to learn jazz improvisation. And it becomes very obvious that the missing ingredient is the ear. They don't have the ear thing together, and they're scared to do it because that's just not the way they learn. And vice versa. The reading the music for me, I mean, I can do it, but it's terrifying, right? So it's the opposite experience. So it becomes very obvious. one of the main things I always hear from people is how scared they are to record themselves for my community and my membership and all sorts of things. So you realize that, and you realize for yourself, right? What's the main reason I felt like I sucked at that gig? Well, it was totally everything going on in here. It wasn't necessarily what I was playing, because sometimes I'll listen to recordings back to myself and I'll be like, hey, that wasn't even so bad, right? It just felt horrible in the moment, but it wasn't so bad. So it's definitely an experience thing, and it's the things that I just see time and time again. And I think any good teacher does that, right? I mean, you do that too. You kind of just distill to the things like, how can I help the student the best I can possibly help? What are the things that I can do to cut the fat? Because there's so much you can learn out there. How do I cut the fat to the very basic things that you should be working on and thinking about?
Absolutely. And one of the things, I have a tremendous amount of years of experience teaching, and, you become a better player when you teach, because you have to illustrate, and you have to impart that information. And when you impart information, you internalize it even better yourself. But, I've had to adapt teaching styles for each particular student. And I think about, is this person a visual learner, or are they an oral, A-U-R-A-L, learner? Are they kinesthetic? Okay. Most of us are a combination, although as adults, we tend to be more visual learners. And how is this person responding? Is there mental garbage going on in their head? Now, this is very true with trumpet players more than anything else, because, and I know this, there's so much pressure on trumpet players to play higher, faster, louder, and all that kind of thing. You're laughing. Yeah, it's so true. But there's a lot of mental garbage going on there that we have to take care of. But what's interesting with what you said, and I've noticed this too, many guitar players, I took guitar briefly in like elementary school, and many guitar players were taught by ear first. Many, not all, many. Whereas horn players, most of us, except if you're someone that's been taking this up, later on in life, in your 60s and stuff, most of us have been taught by reading and playing at the same time. And I was taught that way. And is it horrible? No, but music is an oral experience. And when you take the ear out of the equation, I feel you're not as complete a musician as you can be.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course there's pros and cons to each. I'm sure that you've noticed, like being a great reader can be so helpful in so many ways, and being someone who has a great ear can be so helpful in so many ways. And I find that at the end of the day, of course, being a well-rounded musician is always the best way to go. It's not always the most realistic thing for everybody. And that's why you do sort of have to distill down to, what are you trying to do? Like you asked me about improvisation specifically. I'm giving you things for improvisation, but there could be a slightly different answer for another style of music or a different thing that you're trying to go about doing, right? And so you have to think about all those things. Like what are the skills that I really, really, really need to do, right? And not get distracted by all the noise out there.
All right. So you mentioned about there's a lot of distractions, a lot of noise. And, we both put out content every week, podcasts, YouTube videos. You've got your Inner Circle membership. I'm going to be having my up and coming revamped membership site. And it can get overwhelming for a lot of people. And I almost felt, when you said the word distracted by the noise, I felt the pang of guilt, because I know that I'm trying to put out, and I know you do this too, we try to put out as much value out there, as much good information as possible. But I feel bad at times for the person who may not have had any formal training. And what they do is they go on YouTube, they do their search, or they go on Google, and they come across videos, but they come across videos that are not suitable for where they're at right at that moment. And I'm sure you get a lot of students, even people, in your Inner Circle membership that have felt that. As a teacher, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a weird thing. I think it's not just an issue with like musicians putting out content or any of that stuff. It's just an internet thing. It's like, the amazing thing about it is we have so much amazing information at our fingertips more than ever. The bad thing about it is we have so much information at our fingertips more than ever, right? So it's almost like our education isn't so much about, finding the right, like figuring out what the right information is. It's distilling that into a step-by-step process, right? It's figuring out how to decipher that. And that's why folks like you and me, we do offer courses, we do offer memberships, things like that, where we can say, hey, here's all the great things you can learn. And I hope that helped. But if you really want more help, this is what you need to really get some help, real help, stuff that's going to bring you down a path. That something's going to bring you down a journey, something that's going to bring you into a community, things like that we know are things that are going to actually help you improve. Because you could just go on YouTube, or you can listen to, my podcast and listen to every single episode, which I've had some people do. And, and that's great. That's wonderful. You'll learn so many things, and you may even take action on some of those things, which is the most important thing that you can possibly do. But it's not something that will lead you down a path. And that's what happens. A lot of people get stuck in this content overload. So as teachers, I think it's the responsibility to provide things that do that, right? All of my courses have very little to do with, they do have something to do with it, but they have very little to do with, here's this new music theory trick, and the next lesson is the next music theory trick, and the next one is the next one, the next one, the next one. It's actually very much so practice programs, and things that actually do help bring people through a journey, rather than just here's a bunch more content to work through. And then there's but it still gets complicated. To answer your question, as a teacher and having a membership, all things, it still gets complicated. And even in my membership, we're rolling out things like roadmaps and these, different algorithms to help you find some the stuff that is going to help you in whatever place you're at. So it's always this journey of trying to figure out, what do you actually need? And if I'm thinking about private lesson students, that's, of course, much easier to do because you're not doing on a mass level. But private lesson students, like you mentioned some great things earlier, you were talking about how is this person a visual learner, right? Is this person more of an oral learner? What's their style? Do they get distracted easily? Because you have to craft stuff that is different depending on what kind of person you are. So those are just some thoughts that I have about that.
Yeah. And, also too, going on this topic as well, that's why, I always say this all the time. Look, YouTube, it wasn't around when I was growing up, and YouTube is amazing. There's so many things you can get on YouTube, but it's not personal. It's you're getting bits and pieces of information, and then what do you do with it? I think also there's a responsibility on the student's end too. And students don't want to hear this, but it is. And it's the responsibility of realizing that you have to, number one, realize the best way that you can learn, whether it is visual, kinesthetic, oral, a mix, whatever. Recognize, the commitment, the time that you want, that you can put into these types of things, but also recognize the fact that you need to find someone that can help you find your way on your journey, as opposed to, a lot of people will say, why get a teacher? I've got YouTube. Well, sure. Yeah, you do. But that YouTube video is not going to help you. My text answer to you, a lot of times people ask for mouthpiece advice. I say, honestly, I can't help you because I don't know what you sound like. And you could describe it in words. That means nothing to me, So it's that element. The student has to realize that in order to move forward and progress, they have to invest in themselves. And Speaking of investing, so I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. Let's talk about your Inner Circle membership, because I think it's an amazing member site that you have.
Yeah, well, it's exactly what we're talking about. It's, how do you create resources for students that actually help them achieve certain goals? So our, the Inner Circle membership, that was something that we decided to do because before that we were coming out with courses, which to me is great. And we were coming out with ebooks. Those are the things that, they're much more helpful than YouTube videos, right? They're much more they definitely have more direction to them. They definitely have step-by-step processes, things that are going to help you actually get further faster, right? For us, the decision was a lot to do with community. We wanted to have a community of people because what we noticed too is that one big problem with the whole online learning thing, even if you're doing a private lesson, right? There's the only community is between you and the teacher. Yeah. But you need people that are going through the same thing as you. You need people that are going to help build you up, that are going to help encourage you, that you're going to see are doing that exact same thing that we're doing, so it gets you excited, it gets you revved up. One of our favorite parts about our membership, outside of just, of course, the courses that we have and things like that, is our Jazz Standards Club, where we learn a new jazz standard every single month. And it's so much fun because of the community inside there. They're all posting their exercise here. They're posting the etude that we learned. They're posting their improvisation, and people are giving feedback and all that stuff. And some of them even become friends. And
that's awesome.
Those are the people that I think are really excelling and getting better, is having that community. Of course, what's also great, if someone's looking for that kind of community, and I know this is difficult during COVID times, but finding people in your local area that can really help you get involved. And a lot of people dismiss this, I feel like, the community aspect. They think, well, I don't need community, or I don't like online forums, or I don't like any of these things. And most of the time it's because they haven't really tried it so much, or because they associate it with Facebook. And that makes, there's sort of a little bit of a bad feeling about that, right? Yeah. But I find that when we learn in groups, when we learn with other people, it really helps the process. And one of the main things I hear about all the time is people just not feeling motivated anymore. And of course, you've been there before, Donna, right? Where you don't want to practice sometimes. You're not motivated. There's nothing to motivate you to do it, especially if you don't have a goal at the end that you're trying to reach, or there's something like a pressing deadline. So having that motivation of other people that are just as amped up and excited as you are is really important. That's kind of why we created that, our membership.
For your membership, is there any particular level of player that is most suitable for it? Or are you able to deal with beginner through advanced? Like, who would be best suited for your Inner Circle membership?
Yeah, the main people that are in our membership are beginners and intermediate players. Those are the main people that are in them. However, we do have some advanced players too. And the thing is, all the stuff, whether it's basic or not basic, like I said, a lot of the stuff that we do at Learn Jazz Standards has to do with goal-oriented, focused practicing. Has a lot less to do with learning the newest this or the new that or this new concept. All that stuff we do, and all that stuff is important too. But it's more about having a process and doing what we call the 3 pillars of jazz improvisation. So that would be technique, that would be jazz repertoire, and jazz language. And all advanced pro jazz musicians are doing those 3 things. So really anybody who wants to, if you're advanced or whatever, you can definitely, follow along and do just as well.
What I love about your teaching, we teach very similarly in the sense that it's goal-oriented, it's systems, it's processes. And I love that. I think it's so awesome. And that's why, like people, if you haven't heard the Learn Jazz Standards podcast, absolutely listen to it so you get an idea of how Brent breaks things down. I think it's really amazing. And, kudos to you again for starting the membership, the Inner Circle membership. If people want more information on that, do you have open enrollment, or is it only open at certain times of the year?
Nope. You can join any single time you'd like. Yep. Anytime you'd like. LJSinnercircle.com, where you can do that.
Awesome. Good. And what we're going to do is we're going to put these, all the links we're going to be talking about today, because there's going to be more. We're going to be putting these links in the show notes at saxophonepodcast.com. So, I want to backtrack to Learn Jazz Standards. And, you were gigging in New York, gigging 4 to 5 times a week, taking some private, students on. What made you start, Learn Jazz Standards?
Yeah. So originally it was me and a friend of mine. And the idea was just to create, the reason it's called Learn Jazz Standards is because it was just a place to, hey, we want a resource for people to learn jazz standards, right? So originally what we had is, all these different pages for, there would be chord charts for a jazz standard. There would be a little bio. There would be a play along we made with Band in a Box, which we put up on YouTube, and that kind of like jump started our YouTube channel. But that's what it was. We just a place where if you wanted to learn jazz standards, we gave you some basic resources, a video of, videos of different, YouTube playlists, essentially of recordings of the song, so you could, learn parts of it by ear. And that's kind of what it was all about. Of course, it grew into a much different thing. Not much different. Is that even good English? But a different thing. and a better thing, I think, than just that. But it was really just this idea of creating a resource together, and then it just became my big passion project. I just was, I got really excited about it. I got all into it. I started seeing some success with it, and I just started pouring all of my energy into it, and just loving I do love podcasting, and I do love I did blogging was the big thing that I used to do there. Videos, I sort of mentioned to you before we started recording, is we have a difficult relationship, but I like doing it too a little bit. So I enjoy creating content for people to get help, whether they pay me at the end or not. I just get a lot of joy out of doing it.
Oh, we could tell that. We could absolutely tell that from we could even tell it from this interview here, if you haven't, folks, noticed that already. But without a doubt, all the content that you put out and just the level of detail, I think it's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, and that's why we started it. That's I think we're very very fortunate that it's been so successful and it's done so well, and it's helped a lot of people.
Absolutely. And so Learn Jazz Standards have evolved from like a website, with resources and information, and of course backing tracks. And I know I mentioned to you before, I bought your package of Band in a Box backing tracks, which is, it's great. It's definitely a time saver, and they're good quality backing tracks. But then it's evolved into courses, and then the Inner Circle membership. And now you created something that's going to be coming up on February 27th and 28th. That's really, really amazing. And I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah, well, you're involved in it, so that's why it's especially going to be amazing. So we're having our very first virtual summit called Learn Jazz Live 2021. It's February 27th through 28th. And I like to think of it as we put together what I would call the dream team of jazz educators, especially online jazz educators. You'll recognize a lot of the names. Donna is going to be one of our speakers. We have Amy Nolte, we have Jens Larson, we have Bob Reynolds. We have a whole host of amazing speakers, 20 speakers giving amazing workshops. And the idea is, if anybody's ever been to a conference, and it's obviously we can't be physically all together, but virtual is the next best thing. Yeah. They're really great for just not only getting some incredible education, but also just getting amped up. And it's especially why we decided to have it early in the year, because we wanted people to get really amped up about and inspired to be, taking out their horns and practicing and playing. And so it's going to be a really great time. Lots of really amazing education. Donna, I know that you're going to be teaching on something really cool. I think you're teaching on your 3-step process for learning jazz standards.
Yeah. This is a process that I've used for many years now, and it's my PAC system. And it's a process that I use that will help people to not just learn the tune, and not just memorize it, but really retain it. Because one of the big pain points that people have is they'll learn a tune, they'll think they learned it, and then they go, to try to play it, even if it's a week later, and it's gone. So the process that I'll be driving people through will be that 3-step proven system. Yeah.
That's great. And there's so many amazing workshops. I'm going to be talking about skyrocketing your jazz growth, how to 2x your results while practicing less. I know, super sexy title, but I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm pretty excited to teach on it. And we have so many awesome, just amazing speakers who are just giving away some amazing value. So I'd highly recommend checking it out.
Yes. And folks, I'm going to be putting a link. It will be my link. I'll be putting it in the description in the show notes. And we'll also put this link on the video, on the YouTube video. You can't put it on the podcast audio, but we'll be putting the link right here. It's going to be appearing right underneath. So you can click on that link in the description, and you can be brought to the page. What do people get when they go to this summit? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So for the 2 days, you get access. Well, we have different tickets. So you can get just our live event ticket. So that will just give you access to all of the 20 plus workshops that we have. And so there's 10 or so that come out on day 1 and 10 or so that come out on day 2. For those who have all access passes, there's going to be live Q&As. Most of our speakers are doing live Q&As. So it gives you the opportunity to watch a workshop, and then there's a designated time every single day where, like Donna, I know that you're going to do a live Q&A. So after the workshops are over, you can ask questions, right? Because you might have some questions about the workshops. The other great thing is like all the speakers are giving away some really awesome handouts that go along with their workshops that are really cool. And there's going to be some giveaways too, and just fun things that you normally do at live events, right?
Absolutely. And what's great about this too, we were talking beforehand about, summits, and virtual summits are amazing because you're going to get people from Australia, from New Zealand, from South Africa, all over the world who normally would not be able to attend something like this, because travel, and again, it's nothing to do with the pandemic either. It's travel can be very restrictive. And, just having a virtual summit is going to provide the opportunity for people all over the world to get this kind of education. And, like you said, I'm really excited because, you picked a great lineup of speakers. There's people in there that I'm really, really excited to see as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. Yeah, you just go to the website and check it out. So if you want, you can go to learnjazzstandards.com/everything saxophone. If you go to that link, if you're listening on the podcast, you can see the whole speaker lineup and just all of the really amazing people that are going to be speaking. And I know that you're going to want to be there.
Absolutely. And you won't have to worry about, travel or, whether it's going to be that cold in New York.
Booking your hotel room. You're right.
It gets very cold at that time in New York. I could tell you, I remember winter breaks where there'd be black ice and my car would be sliding out of the driveway because, it's just so cold at night and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry about any kind of weather conditions there. So we've got the Learn Jazz Live Summit coming up February 27th, 28th. You've got your Inner Circle membership that you have already, and we'll put the link in the show notes. You also have your YouTube channel. You've got your podcast. You want to talk a little bit about some of the courses that you have as well?
Yeah, sure. I can totally do that. Yeah. I mean, I have quite a few of them. So just to name a few, one is called Jazz Blues Accelerator. So that's one where I help you learn how to play a jazz blues, and it's really a practice program. It's not even just learning how to play a jazz blues. It's a practice program where you end up not only taking the blues through all 12 keys, but you're learning different etudes in all 12 keys. You're learning exercises in all 12. Basically, you're doing little jam sessions. Basically, you become very proficient in playing the blues. I have one called Minor Blues Accelerator. It's the same concept, but over a minor blues. My flagship course is called 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing. It's the most well-rounded jazz course that I have, and it focuses on those three pillars of jazz improvisation I mentioned earlier: the technique, jazz repertoire, and jazz language. And it's the most full-fledged jazz practice program that takes you through 30 basically practice sessions to help you learn. You end up learning 1 to 2 solos by the time you're done. You learn 2 to 4 jazz standards by the time you're done the process. You learn a bunch of technical exercises and great things too. I have one called Zero to Improv. It's all about the basic jazz theory and kind of how to learn basic jazz theory and then apply it to improv. I have jazz standards playbooks, help you go through 10 different studies of jazz standards with chords analysis, and a bunch of really great stuff. I have an ear training course. I have a lot of them. So.
Yeah, you do. And they're all great. And you know what? You reminded me of something too, and this is a pain point that a lot of people say to me as well. So a lot of people will say, I want to learn jazz, but why do I have to learn all this theory? And I don't know if you've gotten that as well. How do you respond to that when people say that?
Yeah, well, the thing I say primarily to that is you don't have to learn a lot of theory. So a lot of people think that you do have to learn a lot of theory. You do have to. It's helpful to learn theory. Let's just put it that way. It's helpful to learn theory. I think one thing that a lot of people think though is that they have to learn a ton of theory, and I don't necessarily think that's true. For me, I think the basics are. Learn your basic qualities of seventh chords, and learn what the chord tones are. So know what those are. Understand what the diatonic series is. So the major and the minor diatonic series. So that would be harmonizing major seventh chord, or not major seventh chords, but seventh chords with a major scale, for example, would be the major diatonic series. Why is that important? Well, that's just important so that you know what different chord progressions are, what the 1 chord is, the 2 chord, the the 3 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord. Those are just basic things that you need to know, and just understanding where they come from. And I did mention scales too. You don't have to know a bunch of scales. I recommend, at the very bare minimum, learn the major scale for major chords, learn the Mixolydian mode for dominant 7th chords, which is really essentially just a major scale with a flatted 7th in it. And know just some of those terms, like what's a flatted 7th, right? Well, just most scales there's 7 notes, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means the 7th is flatted. So you could just start by learning a major scale, and you can start just adjusting that major scale to make it into other scales. Learn, like, at the very bare minimum, your Dorian mode, which is just simply starting a major scale on the 2nd, scale tone, essentially. Learn your natural minor scale. You don't have to learn all of the melodic minor and all that stuff. They're all good to learn. But if you're just like trying to learn the bare minimum, just learn a few scales, like 3 or 4 scales will get you a long way. And then I will tell you, and most people will, not like to hear this, but scales are definitely helpful. Don't throw them away for learning improvisation, but they're also not the main way I would say you should learn improvisation. So I would more so say chord tones. So that's why I always say chord tones first. Just be able to play your major 7th chord, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. What's the minor? Root, flat 3, 5, flat 7. What's the dominant 7? Root 3, 5, flat 7, right? So just understand how to do those in all the different keys. So that's not a lot of music theory. And the most difficult one probably is the minor diatonic series, because you're harmonizing 3 different scales, and it's helpful to understand that. I usually just simplify it to one diatonic series of the most common chords. That all sounds scary to you. It really just comes down to, learning what the most common things that you see in jazz standards are. So I also like to just say, if you want to learn some theory, start with the tune Autumn Leaves, which is kind of a simple tune. It's not that difficult. It basically is based off of major and minor 2-5-1 chord progressions. So if you understand what those are, that's where you're going to see most of that in jazz standards happen. Also, it has it has relative keys, the major and the minor. So once you understand that, the C major scale, that A minor is the relative minor. It's the 6th tone of the C major scale. So if you start on A and you end on A, that's the relative minor. So if you understand those basic things, then it just starts opening up everything else. And then there's so many complicated things you can worry about, like, the different applications of the melodic minor, and what's the 7th mode of the melodic minor, and all this other stuff that, you can slowly learn, but you don't have to learn it. Just some basic things like chords and chord progressions and some basic scales will take you a long way. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome answer, because, again, I agree with you. You don't need to know a ton of theory in order to be able to play jazz. You alluded to this before too, like people, when they want to go to a jam session, they feel that, and we've all gone through this, right? I'm not ready yet. I have to reach a certain level before I can go to a jam session. And I think a lot of people also feel, oh, no, I can't do jazz yet. I have to learn a certain amount of theory first, especially if you're classically trained. That's kind of like the mindset in a sense, because we've been taught to read and play at the same time. But no, you could even take simpler tunes, some modal tunes. You could take stuff like So What? Impressions, but not so fast. Impressions is the title, not Impressions, not so fast. But Impressions at a slower tempo. And you could learn by learning the tune, by learning what you need to know for the tune. That's how you're learning the theory, and you're applying the theory because you're having an experience with something where it's going to stick, as opposed to many people feel they need to get a book and read the book and then try to apply it. That's not the best way to go.
I 100% agree with you. It's always better to, especially with jazz, I always say, jazz standards are the vehicles in which jazz musicians use to improvise. So you could literally learn how to improvise, at least in the jazz, idiom, through jazz standards exclusively. They will teach you all of the lessons that you want to learn. You mentioned a good one, So What by Miles Davis, or Impressions by John Coltrane. There's only 2 chords. It's concert D minor and concert E flat minor. And, you can play just one scale over both of those. So, 2 scales. You can play D Dorian, or you can play E flat Dorian. Those are just 2 things. And you don't have to know even all the modes of the major scale. The Dorian is the second mode of the major scale, by the way. So even if you have no idea what modes are and you don't know what all the modes are at all anyways, if you could just learn the Dorian, and there you go. You just learned something new, and you learned an entire, I like to call them pitch collections, a bunch of different collections of notes that you can use to make music. All right. Because if you just play a scale and you think about it as a linear pattern, that could be detrimental to you as far as improvising. And it's hard to break free of that sometimes when you just think about, oh, D Dorian, we start on the D, we end on the D, right? If you think that way, you'll start sounding like scales. But if you think of them as pitch collections, as just notes that exist as possibilities.
Yes.
And those are just the possibilities, because especially in jazz, like, it's very stylistically correct to play lots of chromatic notes, meaning notes that aren't even in the scale, but they connect to other notes that are in the scale, or chord tones that they're not chord tones, but they're notes that aren't chord tones, but they resolve to a chord tone. That's a very common thing to do. And, you have all these notes available to you as a reference, a guide. And that's so simple, right? Just the Dorian mode for both of those. And then you could experiment as much as you want with playing all the wrong notes and figuring out how to make them sound right too. So,
yes.
and it's just 2 chords. So it's not even that difficult.
Right. And actually, you just said the word too, the chords, and you're going to start to hear and I'm going to put this quote unquote right notes, the chord tones, how they sound. And then if you start to play non-chord tones that are supposedly not right, what you're going to also start to realize, and you're going to start to teach yourself, is that those are the extensions that a lot of, professional jazz players tend to emphasize, tend to play, that make it sound much more pro or professional.
Yeah. And I also say this too a little bit, is sometimes, and this is where I do think that leading first with the ear is so important with improvisation, is, you could learn a line from Sonny Rollins, over a 2-5-1 chord progression or whatever it happens to be. And, it sounds really good. You're like, why does this sound so good? Well, it's because he's playing the flat 9 and he's resolving to the third of the 1 chord. And these are things you have no idea that they exist. But what you can do is kind of start looking into it. Well, what are the notes that relate to each chord, right? How do they work? And again, all you needed to know is some basic music theory to understand even what any of that was in the first place. And you could say the flat 9, Sonny Rollins liked to use that flat 9 over the 5 chord, and creates all this tension, and then you can start figuring that out, and then you start connecting the dots between the ear and the intellectual, right? The side that you were hearing that you knew sounded great and you were able to play on your instrument, but then it kind of comes full circle when you actually spend a little time to understand theoretically why that is. And for a lot of people, sometimes that's the missing link, right? For some people, it's not. For some people, they're like, the theory just is like math to them, and they don't like math, and it throws them off. So for a lot of people, like, having a little bit of both is really helpful. So it can go, it can, if you start with the ear and then you look to the theory, even just the basic theory, it just can create an aha moment for you potentially. And
it'll make it stick.
Yes, exactly.
That's the whole point with that. Listen, Brent, I wanted to thank you so much for your time here today. I just have I have one more question that a lot of my listeners like me to ask, and then we're going to say those events that are coming up too. So, if there was an item, program, an app, or whatever that was under $100 that you can't live without, and I'll say musical. Okay, a musical.
Okay, it has to be musical. Okay, that makes it harder. All right.
What would it be for you?
Oh man, that is a tricky question, because I don't really have a lot of music apps on my phone.
Really?
I don't. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to go through my phone right now and just take a quick look at what I actually have on there. I have
interesting.
I have Fender Tune for tuning my guitar, because I always forget to change the batteries of my guitar tuner. So sometimes I'm doing it the old school way. That's not old school with an app, but just by something picking it up that's not attached to my guitar. I have iReal Pro. I'd have to say iReal Pro, and I'll say iReal Pro. The reason I'll say that is because it does help you if you're in a bind, right? If you don't know a tune and you're at a jam or a gig. And it's also just an easy resource if you are even learning a tune by ear, but you're having some trouble finding the chords. It's it's a resource to have very quickly and readily and cheaply available to you. That being said, I always make big disclaimers on fake books and iReal Pro and any of that stuff, is that the chords aren't necessarily always the correct chords. So I'll say all that, but I would definitely say iReal Pro, because it's definitely helped me in some gigs where I just didn't know the tune. And so just pulling it up really quick to like quickly look at the chords or to confirm what my ears were hearing was helpful to just kind of get me by. So I would say iReal Pro.
That's actually really great. And you bring up a great point. And, in addition to that, with that app, what's great about it, though, is that you could slow down the tempo.
Yeah.
And that's a great practice feature for that, too. When especially if you're learning a standard that may be at a faster tempo than what you're used to. So I like it for that reason, too. And there is, there's a separate version for like mobile devices versus your laptop, desktop. But there's forums on there where you could download tons of songs for free. And it's not just jazz either. I mean, there's the Beatles, there's rock, there's Latin, all those types of things. So it's an amazing resource without a doubt. Yeah.
But also, can I change my answer though?
Sure.
I want to change to Spotify, and the reason I want to that counts as a music app, right? Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
I was thinking more like a music learning app, but I think Spotify. I would say Spotify, like simply for this one reason, and this definitely like really will resonate with like jazz people, is you can type in the name of a jazz standard, and you literally have hundreds of different versions of that jazz standard available to you, which again, to me is like the most important thing, is like you should listen the crap out of a new tune you want to learn, so that you literally maybe I'll have to go over this on another episode sometime, but I have like a whole process called the list process for learning jazz language by ear, but a big part of like literally most of it is like listening and different kinds of listening, because you could literally actually know the entire song or the solo at least in your head, or be able to sing it before you even get your instrument out, and you've basically cut down the work by like 50, 60, 75%, right? So Spotify, for that reason, that is such an amazing resource, because I remember like going to the library and, renting them and then illegally ripping them onto my computer and all these horrible things. So it's also more ethical. So it's good. Looks like I just admitted to pirating music on your podcast.
That's awesome, because I'll admit that too. I did the same thing. There was something called what was it? LimeWire. There was LimeWire, right? And then what was the one that was after something with an N? Oh gosh, this was before iTunes came out. Oh crap. Napster, that's it. Yeah, Napster. And so I would use LimeWire. I was in a whole bunch of bands and stuff like that. It was cover bands. So I needed to know all these tunes. YouTube wasn't out at the time. And so LimeWire was a way to search and to like download, these tunes, these recordings. So this way I could learn this stuff, because there was no sheet music involved. You had to learn all this stuff by ear. But that's interesting. 2 points too. Like your list method is very similar to my HSP method, which is something that I use for not just learning tunes, but just for everything. Because as a horn player, especially as a trumpet player, if you're not able to hear the pitches that you need to play beforehand, and again, I know beginners, that sounds daunting, but as you progress, you'll understand more what I'm talking about. But you really need to hear what you need to play, the pitch especially beforehand, because then you could really be out in terms of intonation, or just mostly intonation, and also tonal quality as well. But interesting that you said Spotify compared to YouTube. I'm more of a YouTube person, so interesting that you said Spotify.
I guess it could go either way, but you said I guess YouTube is an app too, so yeah. Although, okay, I will say one thing, like one resource that I provide for our members in our Jazz Standards Club monthly studies, I always create YouTube playlists and Spotify playlists. And I usually find like way more recordings though when I'm going and making the Spotify playlists.
Oh, how interesting.
So that's why I would say Spotify over YouTube.
I'm writing that down, because I'm more of a YouTube person. But what's interesting too, and I don't know if you've noticed this, I teach people all over the world, and I'll give them a YouTube link to something, and in their country, it's not the same link.
Yeah,
and sometimes Yeah. And sometimes those links are, it comes up to something really bad. So I'm sure that Spotify would probably not have that issue.
I don't know. I haven't had any like people in my international audience complain that it wasn't available to them or anything like that just yet. So yeah, you never know. There could be like certain, like, different countries have different like restrictions, or they don't, or does Spotify not exist in certain countries?
That's another thing I don't know.
I'm sure that it does not exist in certain countries, but yeah, anyways, I don't know.
Yeah. All these things, it's amazing too, again, God, I mean, 20 years ago, we didn't have all this stuff. And now look at it. And now, when we look to the future, right? 20 years from now, I can only imagine all the stuff that's going to be out there. It's going to be just incredible.
Yeah. Well, you could just download into your brain, how to play the tune. You don't have to, our podcasts will be obsolete. You won't have to listen to it ever again,
That's right. It'll be osmosis, diffusion, all that kind of thing, all the information. All right. Well, listen. So again, tell us the dates for Learn Jazz Live.
Yeah, Learn Jazz Live, the virtual summit. It's going to be February 27th through the 28th. That's a Saturday and a Sunday. You can obviously, Donna's got the links, or go to learnjazzstandards.com/everything saxophone, and you can also get there as well. And even if you can't show up live, if you get an all access pass, you can get access to all the recordings.
And it's going to be an amazing event. I'm really, I'm so honored that you asked me to be a part of it. I'm really looking forward to this and really looking forward to present. And listen, thank you so much. Again, more kudos to you because, I've listened to your podcast for a long time. I've bought your products, and I think you're doing such wonderful, fantastic, work for the jazz community, for musicians everywhere. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Donna. The feeling's mutual. And thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been really great.